So welcome back. The Impact Sessions podcast is back after a short break. And to celebrate being back, I've got a fantastic first guest for us. The guest today is James Steptoe. He's the Global Sales Director of a company called Puretech Process Systems. Now, James had a very interesting pandemic, as most of us have had, but we're going to talk today about exploring how he's built a growing, successful global business in a global pandemic. And given his role as Global Sales Director, how that's panned out and what the challenges have been. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Nice backdrop with your branding on there. Good to see. So always the sales professional. Like to see that as well.
Do my bit. Have to do my bit.
Excellent. Well, listen, you've had can only be described as an interesting time over the pandemic. A lot of people have, but I think given the nature of your role, particularly, and what you've had to try and achieve with both hands tied behind your back and your legs and everything else, it's worth exploring, what how you got through that and what the results have been. So before we get any further, I guess I always say to my guests, tell us a little bit about Puretech Process Systems and why being global really is the only option for a business like you.
You can add blindfolded as well to that, having your arms tied behind your back and legs tied. So yeah, I was appointed in August 2019 as Global Sales Manager for Puretech. The main core of Puretech's business is water treatment systems in the pharmaceutical sector. So we will purify and treat the water that's required for all sorts of applications across pharmaceutical, including vaccines, but there's obviously lots of other applications that water is used for and different types of water. So although we are based in the UK in South London, we have a global part of our business, which we export these systems that we manufacture in the UK across the globe. So we're quite strong in Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, as well as having systems in Africa and Europe and America as well. Okay. So at the time I was appointed, my role was to go out and about and identify, meet, appoint new agents and new distributors, support them in their sales and local marketing, with a view of increasing our inquiries and increasing our revenue.
Well, I think in the early days, you probably had your passport ready. You probably had your visas all in place, your inoculations up to date. And then I guess 6 months later, all bets were off and we didn't even know what we didn't know, did we, in March 2020? It was almost like, will I ever get on a plane again? And, having done that, what was your first reaction to the travel ban, I guess personally, but also professionally? What was your reaction in February, March, April, when the world was just locking down, by region?
Well, personally, I loved it because I was home with the girl, my 2 girls and my wife, and we spent lots of time together, which was great because I was married at the time 10, 11 years, and every week of my working life, I'd have gone away, whether it be for 2 nights or 3 nights. So to have, a couple of months at the time of knowing I'm not going anywhere was great. Professionally, I was quite worried initially because I was only been working for Puretech for best part of 6 months as a global sales manager role at the time, and thinking, I could be out of a job here. I can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I flew back from Thailand on the 2nd of March, and you talking to people on the plane and what's going on. Obviously, if in that part of the world, they were a bit further ahead of us at that time, but things were still happening. I don't think I actually ever really believed that there would be much of a change. Flights would, in a few months would start up again and everyone would get back to a normal life. And, here we are 2 years later, pretty much, and it's still not normal. So I didn't think I believed it at first. And then obviously you get the Prime Minister on TV saying you can't leave your house, you can't go shopping unless it's for essential items, thinking, oh, this is quite serious. So the initial reaction was of don't really believe what's happening, to then very quickly realizing this is serious and I've got to try and do something different. Having given the business were fantastic, straight away we said, No one worry about anything. You're going to be employed. You can carry on doing your job. We do other things as well as pharmaceutical water. So there was lots of medical gas work going on. So as a company, we were very well looked after and reassured that don't worry, we're going to keep going.
I think that reassurance in the early stage, I think the companies that have come through this stronger were really good at communicating, weren't they? And really good at that reassurance piece, because the uncertainty was the real crux of the issue in March, April, May, certainly 2020. So for you to hear very early on, don't worry, your job's safe, then allows you, I guess, on a professional level to start thinking about, and I guess this is my next sort of expansion really, is, you know, what did you start to think about in terms of, well, the world might be shut for a while here. You know, what were the stages you went through in terms of growing your customers and distributors, and how did you start to shift from a, you know, what would have been your previous role of getting on a plane, going to expos, visits, meetings? How did you start the shift to give you a chance of maintaining some global success?
What was fantastic was after I got that reassurance from the company, I could then sit down and I didn't have to worry about what my job might look like. It was, you've still got a job, get on with it, basically. And you've got the freedom to do that. And we've always had that freedom. So that's a great ethos and how they developed the business over the years. So you quite quickly completely change your mindset and thinking about what's going to happen to say, what am I going to do? It's not, we can't control the pandemic. It's here, and it's how you react to that, isn't it? A lot of the time. So try and react positively. And luckily, the market in which we were working in, they had to react as well. So when we had exhibitions in a big hall of thousands of people, very quickly, these big organizations were actually organizing virtual exhibitions and virtual meetings. And all of a sudden, because they were doing that, it allowed us to get involved with that. So that's what we did. And trying to find agents was still very difficult because the different people involved with the exhibitions who might not be in a, I think there was a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon of exhibitions because they were cheaper and virtual, what they wouldn't have done if they had to go and be there in person. So
I guess that then makes it difficult for you to work out how realistic someone's ambitions to be an agent or a distributor for you are, because they've not got that normal presence. It's very easy to be virtual, isn't it? And look like you're something virtue, you know, versus being in an exhibition hall with a big stand and staff and all the stuff that goes with doing that. So I would imagine some of your early decision making might have been quite challenging in terms of, you know, which relationships to pursue and that kind of thing.
Exactly that. And it was difficult because you would trawl through the list of guests and the type of companies that were there. And you think, yeah, I'll try and contact this person or I won't bother with that one. And you put out messages, can we meet in a virtual meeting room? And actually, they weren't really interested. I think they would use that more of a marketing exercises for their potential customers rather than wanting people like me to try and tap them up to work with us. So they were there for very different reasons. And in a hall with these people talking face to face, you can quickly distinguish between the guys that are interested in that. You get at least you get the chance to have the conversation. Virtually, they can decide without even looking at you really, or talking to you certainly, and they've made their mind up before you've had a chance to even talk to them.
I think there's also in the early days, people were going on to anything just to say that to their particular employers that they're busy. You know, lots of people going to exhibitions as well. I've been at a virtual exhibition all day. Really, have they? They've been sat there in the slippers and, you know, been around, but they've not really put the same work in that they would have done if they were at a big sort of exhibition in an exhibition hall in, you know, India or, you know, China or whatever it might be, I guess. So what experience have you had at that stage in your previous parts of your career of being a virtual guy then, James? Was it all new to you?
Yes, absolutely. My roles previous to this were mainly UK based roles. So what happened pre-pandemic was the customers expected you to be there. You couldn't have an initial meeting on a telephone or via Zoom or Teams. They expected you to drive for 4 hours, sit down for half an hour with them, complete waste time and go home again. That's what they expected. That's what, as a sales guy, you were expected by your employer to do that as well. That was how you filled your day, sitting in a car. But yeah, it was really a lot of it. A lot of wasted dead time.
Yeah.
But what has changed, and it changed very quickly, was because we weren't allowed to go to a lot of these pharmaceutical sites in the UK, and obviously overseas was even more difficult. Very quickly, it was normal to have initial meetings and calls via Zoom. They wanted that, and they still do in lots of ways. They still want to have an initial call with you via Zoom because it's quicker, it's easier. You can get a lot of the simple information out of each other that you need to get, and the information gathering. And you can do it all like this. And you can get 5 or 6 people involved. It's easier for them to jump on a call rather than get everybody in a meeting room when they've got to walk across the it's quicker. So a lot of the initial preamble to a project, if you like, can be done like this. And very quickly, the customer accepted that as a norm.
I think as part of the sales process, certainly there might be 3, 4, 5 at least touch points before the sale becomes complete. And I reckon if there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a big percentage of those could be done virtually now, couldn't they? You're still going to have to do the face-to-face at some stage, potentially, not always, but this has changed the way we are doing business, isn't it? And I'm assuming you're doing a lot less miles than you've ever done previously in terms of the motorway networks of the UK for your UK clients, but certainly not getting on as many planes. We'll come to planes a bit later. Can I ask you how long it was into this sort of new way of working that you realised that this could actually still be okay and could still deliver for Puretech? Then was there a tipping point? Was there a light bulb moment, or was it just a series of just cracking on with it?
It was a series of cracking on with it. Our sales process from initial contact to an order is anywhere between 6 months and 24 months. Right. So it's not the impact of what was going on wasn't immediate from a sales perspective. It was still having to engage with people and making sure that we were there. So what very quickly we realized that people wanted to hear about something that you were doing. So the content for which they weren't great at originally. We did case studies like everybody does, but they were probably quite old and they were just on the website and we weren't doing a lot with them. They were just sitting there on the 4th tab along on our websites where nobody goes to anyway, just doing nothing. So we realized quite quickly that we need to get this really good information, or really good customer feedback. A lot of them had customer names on and companies. Let's start talking about it. If it's last year or 2 years, it doesn't matter. We've still done it. So that was a very quick way for us to sort of get things out on LinkedIn and get things more prominent on the website, so people can see them and share them. Maybe we had one case study that we actually revamped 3 times at the same job, but we came at it at different angles. So you've got 3 bits of content then that talks about different areas of expertise. So we had all that in place, but we didn't really do anything with it. So quite quickly, it was an easy win to get that content out.
Was that a strategic decision then to look at your communication strategy? Because the one thing that you've got in your control in a global pandemic is how you choose to communicate, and what you choose to communicate. Everything else might be a little bit, somebody else's agenda, for example. But it's interesting that you grasped that quite quickly. Was that, have you done a bit of a revamp on your brand? Have you tweaked your website? What have you done? What have you done to change what might have been seen as traditional to a bit more sort of new age, really?
Well, coincidentally, we were already rebuilding our website pre-pandemic, and it went live about February time, I think, from memory. And at the same time, we were going through a rebranding. So that was all that could take quite a long time to do all that, because that hadn't been done for a long time. But a lot of that hard work was already in place. What I had then was the time to actually look at it, because it's always there to do, re-look at the case studies, what else can we do with LinkedIn and what have you. It was always on the list to do, but of course, it always got put to the bottom of the list. What it gave me was the time to actually sit down and properly look at this. How can we do this? What are we going to do? What have we got? What do we need? And that's the gift of the pandemic was time to do that, really.
In those early days, when it was, well, no one was doing anything much, so why don't we grab a project, whatever that project might be. A lot of businesses grabbed a project, didn't they? Like, say, a rebrand, a revamp, a website update, something on social media, for example. So adaptability and adaptation seem to be the key for you. What have been some of the challenges as you are transitioning from your traditional approach to sales, which had been successful as a business, you know, prior to you starting, and it's starting to happen for you 6 months into the role? You know, what were some of the surprises, if any, or, you know, that you realize you're on the right track?
When customers engage back with you, because when you were doing things from a screen before the pandemic, you wouldn't necessarily know what the reaction was until you saw a like on LinkedIn or somebody commented. But because you're not as engaged in that before as we are now,
yeah,
having that feedback, even if it was after a Zoom call or a bit of training that we had done, or the webinar that we did last year, the feedback you get from that, I think, well, this is actually working. And just conversations. We appointed a distributor in Southeast Asia and another one in China. I've never met them. I've not been out for a meal with them. I've contacted them and spoke to them via Zoom, WhatsApp, and email. And yet we signed this agreement for 2 years for the whole of Southeast Asia.
wow,
And it's a similar one for China. And if you said, would you have done that 2 years ago? You said, no, of course not. I want to go meet the guy. I want to go and see who's in charge of their Southeast Asia or their Singapore office and their Malaysia office. I want to go meet them.
And I want to see their facility and all the stuff that goes with that. You know, you want that confidence, don't you, of people to people, face to face. And so, okay, so talk me through, was there a first success, whether it's the first appointment of an agent, first appointment of a distributor, first new customer order? Was there something that set a little light bulb off at you at some stage in the pandemic? You said, well, we can make this work. You know, was there something that gave you that confidence?
I think our appointment of the agent in Southeast Asia, they're quite a big organization. And we started talking to each other in July time of 2020. And the contact was a friend of mine down here in South Wales, knew somebody in Singapore who knew somebody who knew a company who knew somebody who might be interested. And you think, okay, and then you WhatsApp them, and then you set up a Zoom call with them, and then they put you on to somebody else. And it wasn't until the January that we actually signed an agreement with this company. So a good 6 months after the initial contact. The most worrying, the most concerning thing, if you're not worrying, concerning or apprehensive a little bit, was how do I learn to trust these people, having not met them and never shaken them by the hand? And I think you have to learn to maybe trust people without knowing them as well as you would do if you'd met them and gone out for dinner with them. So you have to learn to trust people more. And luckily, touch wood for us, we've not been stung by that. You have to rely on your judge of character and get to know them via Zoom. And we've spent quite a few hours on Zooms together over the last 12 months. And I think I know you fairly well.
Yes.
But we only met twice.
Yeah.
But you have to do it. You have to adapt. You have to learn to get to know. You talk about things aren't just work.
I'd only seen your top half. I didn't know if you had. I didn't know if you were 8 foot tall or 4'6". You know, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Lucky for you, that's my better half, so it's all right.
Okay. Well, listen. The other thing is, it's not just about sales, though, is it? It's about things like marketing, networking, exhibitions. It's even your legal process. You know, you'd normally go through due diligence in a different way, face to face. How did you adapt that entire process to get to a stage where everything was in place in that January to sign an agent for the Southeast Asia region, which is massive as a region, and I'm assuming quite a big deal? You know, there's more than just we want to sell here. There's everything has to be in place, don't there? The full process. What did you have to go through?
So once we decided, because we had two options actually, there was two companies that we were choosing between, and we went for the larger organization that covers the whole region rather than just Singapore, which we were looking at the time. What we had to go through, we actually changed it from an agent to a distributor, was probably the big thing we did. If it's an agent, we would tend to quote direct to the end user. So each job contractually is with the end user. if we're selling to a distributor, all of a sudden contractually it's a whole lot easier. So we've just got one customer in the whole of Southeast Asia effectively, which
Right.
so that was a big thing. Most of our existing representatives globally were agents where we quote to our end users direct, and we include commission in the quote, and that's how we deal with it, and that's contractually with the end user. But for the Chinese one and the Southeast Asia, we changed it to distributor because it was so much easier contractually for us. So that's probably quite a big thing. Making sure that they had all the marketing material that they needed that was relevant for them in their region. The website, for example, we let them adapt to the website so they can use it locally in their own language. Previously, we hadn't really done that because everything was in English. It was done by us in the UK. So it changed for that point of view, and making our content relevant. A lot of our content was quite generic,
Right.
making it relevant for maybe their region. What are they talking about? Water for injections was a massive thing, obviously, with the pandemic and the vaccination and all that. Suddenly we were really lucky, the market we work in, was all over the news for 2 years. So having relevant content wasn't maybe as difficult as it was pre-pandemic. So we were very lucky in that respect. So you have your relevant content, and we did a webinar, which is excellently well received. We had
your webinar, an education piece. Was it about Puretech? Was it about the sector? Was it about technical stuff? What was the webinar designed for?
We didn't want to make it a Puretech promotional video.
Yeah.
No. So we focused on a quality of water called water for injection, and we looked at it at the pros and cons of the different types of technology that you can now use to obtain water for injection. Pros and cons of both, all technologies, the costs and the running costs, the capex, opex, those different things. So it was relevant to lots of people, whether they're procurement, whether they're validation, whether they're engineering managers. It was of interest of all types of stakeholders that would normally be involved with purchasing something like that. So that's how we came at it.
Would you normally have done something like that in a region, in a lecture theatre, or would you have not done that? Was the webinar a direct result of the pandemic? It's something you've never done in that particular way, or was it just a version of something that would have been handled locally in a region previously?
Well, ironically, when I first started, we were looking to set up seminars in regions. So in Bangladesh, for example, we were organising a seminar for our agents' customers, and that was being planned sort of September, October, November time before the pandemic. So we were starting to look at that. Obviously, that all fell by the wayside. We hadn't done a webinar in the past. My experience of webinars, obviously, you couldn't move, could you, for webinars at the start of the pandemic? Every week you get an invite to a webinar.
I'll be honest with you, I can't really knock that because I was probably sending the invites out in the early days, to be fair, James.
We had a couple. But we waited 6 months, 12 months, because there was so many, and I thought there was probably too many people just trying to do stuff which you can completely understand. So we left it and didn't do it till middle of last year. But it was very well received. And talking about feedback we mentioned earlier, the feedback we got from that webinar, we had 200 people registered for the webinar. We had 100 people actually sign up, which I thought was, I was expecting maybe 30% of the original 200. We had 100 people actually sign into the live webinar, and that was all over the world. And we had 20 questions afterwards. The Q&A afterwards was fantastic. So I think we got it right. We pitched it right with the approach and what angle we were coming at it at. And it worked. And we'll do another one.
So what's the learning curve from that? I was going to ask you a question about the whole sort of process of shifting traditional approaches and sales to this sort of online, remote, distance working, etc. Let's take the webinar as one example of that. What are the learning points that you perhaps want to share with our audience in terms of, why they should consider it as an opportunity then?
consider a webinar or just generally?
Well, consider your content, because it might not be a webinar, it could be a podcast, could be new website content, it could be case studies. But considering your content and maybe from your webinar point of view, what would you say to somebody who's never done one and thinks, well, maybe I'm not sure? You've had a great success with it, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend it. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of thought to get it to the stage where you think this is what I want to do. But what I would say is, with the content and everything generally over the last 2 years, it's not just been one thing that we've done. It's not just been the webinar that we can say, yeah, that's been the best thing. We've done lots of different little things. So whether it's revamping our case studies, making 3 case studies out of one, the webinar, this podcast is another way of just flying the Puretech flag a little bit. We signed up to a pharmaceutical portal where there was, I think it's about 350,000 members of it. We've got a landing page on that. That's part of it. LinkedIn, we had 114 followers on LinkedIn in January before the pandemic. We've now got 555 or something. Just not by doing anything special, just by being there and being relevant, and lots of bits and pieces, posting as regular as we can, but not too much. All these things combined, we looked at our Google AdWords. We had loads of Google AdWords. We cut them down, so the inquiries that we now get are relevant to exactly what we want. We don't get many bad ones now. So
more qualified, aren't they, by the time they come to you already? That's as a result of a direct strategy, I guess, isn't it, really? But just sorry to cut you off, just going a bit back a little bit, you got to sort of January 2021, where you got the Southeast Asia agent or distributor in place. How else is it? How's the landscape looked? We've mentioned 2 years. How's the landscape looked over those 2 years? What does the numbers look like? What does the business look like compared to with a crystal ball, what it might have looked like if we hadn't had a pandemic and you were doing the job traditionally as you were taking on in August 19 to do?
Well, if we hadn't had the pandemic, obviously we would have been really successful and been absolutely flying, absolutely fantastic. Who knows? What I hadn't appreciated at the time, I don't think, is how different each country would actually be now, and how they're trying to control the pandemic. Singapore and China are doing a completely different job to what probably we're doing here in Europe, and maybe certainly in Central and Southern America. So I thought Singapore would get through it quite quickly and they'll be open as normal and it'd be great. Far from it. They've gone through lockdown, through lockdown, through lockdown. Europe, different, maybe 2 or 3 lockdowns. Singapore, lockdown every few weeks, go out and then go back in again. So the landscape is different from country to country. It makes it very difficult. Regarding sort of figures, and we have grown. Puretech grew last year in our turnover. We got orders with an agent that we appointed during the pandemic over in Mexico. We appointed agents in Brazil, in Spain, in Egypt, in China, in Southeast Asia, all during the pandemic. And I've only met the agent in Egypt so far this year.
Is it too early to say if you got them all right? I mean, these things take time to bed in. Gut feeling is you wouldn't have got them wrong because you wouldn't have gone down that route. But, is there more risk associated with virtual appointments than there would be face-to-face?
Yes, I would say there definitely is, because, it's like meeting someone in person. You can definitely not judge them, is probably the wrong word, but you can get a better idea of what they're like as a person, who they are, by meeting them in person.
You get a vibe, don't you, really, that you can sort of feel, I guess.
And that's never going to change. And certainly talking to people in different countries with the language barrier, they obviously speak in English. It's even more difficult because I can judge somebody in the UK because they're all speaking the same language. It's a lot easier, but doing that overseas, people that maybe can't speak brilliant English or not their first language, it's very difficult over over Zoom to do that. So you have to rely on your instinct. And look, we might have got things wrong. You know, one of our agents, we had a bit of an issue with because they were doing things that we didn't know anything about regarding the website and branding and things, which we weren't too happy about. But would that have been any different if I'd met them? Who knows? Who knows? You would have thought, you would hope that you'd have more of a relationship if you'd met them face to face, potentially.
How they reacted to being appointed virtually then as well? Do you think they feel the same as they would about being a part of the Puretech family as they would have done face to face? It's difficult, I guess, to say in general, but does it feel to them as though they're still as valued and valuable to the Puretech family, even though they've not met you yet?
Yeah, I think so. That's about how we go about our business. You could have an agent in Denmark up the road, in relatively speaking, in Denmark. If you don't talk to them for 6 months to a year, they're not going to feel valued. And that can be whether you're on a Zoom call or via an email or going out to see them. There's no different from, it's up to us to make sure they feel valued and don't focus on one area, because they're all of our agents are doing the same job for us. They're effectively doing our sales and marketing locally. We support them. If you're not supporting them and making them feel like they're wanted, they're not going to, they just won't do it. They'll move on to the guy who is looking after them. They might be selling something else, and then they concentrate on that and they forget about what you're doing. So you'd have to do that anyway. So I think a lot of it comes from us and how they feel.
It's quite a difficult management thing, isn't it? Managing agents and distributors, because they are your representatives on the ground. You do have to impart your culture and how to do business the Puretech way. You do have to make sure that they're on board with that, but then you have to keep them happy and you have to keep them, in the loop, and you have to communicate a lot. So I think things like Zoom and Teams and, WhatsApp, particularly certainly in the Southeast Asia area and India, WhatsApp's a definite preferred default sort of communication tool, isn't it?
It is. And that can be frustrating in lots of ways, because you might start a conversation on email and then they finish it on WhatsApp. So when you're trying to scroll through what was said and who said what, when, why, how, you're looking through like 2 or 3 different platforms to try and work out what the conversation meant like.
You kind of knit it all together, and then there's a LinkedIn comment they made, and then there's sort of WhatsApp and an email and something on it. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay.
Which can be quite difficult, but it's great from a convenience. You can even send PDFs now, can't you, on WhatsApp? And I now have WhatsApp on my laptop, so I can actually get a PDF and I can copy it to the files and I can share it on email if I need to. So even that technology is adapted, quite quickly. I can't remember when WhatsApp was available on laptop, but I'm assuming that a lot of people got involved with that on a laptop during the pandemic, because
I would imagine, yeah. I mean, how much of the new way of working, the stuff we've talked about, I've got to do it by Zoom, we've got to do WhatsApp meetings, got to appoint people and look after them remotely, a lot less traveling, difficulties with geography. Let's take Singapore. Ordinarily, you would have booked a tour to Southeast Asia because you're going to go to Bangladesh, you're probably going to go to China and Singapore. But if each local area's got different restrictions, that makes that nigh on impossible anyway, doesn't it? So how much of what you're now doing and the way you work do you think is now embedded as the norm?
I think there will be a new normal. How many times have we heard that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to open the door to that.
Thank you for that.
We'll use the word pivot in a minute and then we're okay. We're definitely done, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people will rush back to go back to what it was before, because they've not done it for such a long time. Like, I want to go here, I want to go there, I want to go meet these people because I've not seen anyone for 2 years. And I think there'll be a massive, that would change massively back to how it was initially, I think. But then I think it will sort of go back a little bit, and there'll be somewhere in between that we end up being in a few years' time. There will obviously be a place for Zoom, and there'll be a place for Teams and WhatsApp, but there will still be a place to have these face-to-face meetings. And I think it might lean more to the face-to-face side rather than lean more towards the virtual WhatsApp, Zoom communication channels. So there will be a happy medium in between, but I think there'll be a massive surge of people who just want to go everywhere and do everything because they're desperate to go and do it.
Well, I'm assuming someone's planning a massive exhibition somewhere that the world is going to attend simply because they can, and that might feel like I sort of tend to agree. There's a pent up travel requirement, isn't there? Which brings me to a question: have you been on a plane recently? And if so, where did you go and how did you feel about it?
I landed yesterday afternoon from Naples in Italy,
Right.
and the traveling itself on a plane, the only difference on the plane is the fact you've got to wear a mask for the entire journey, unless you're eating or drinking. So there's an obvious way around the mask if you wanted to. What is a bit of a pain at this moment in time is the paperwork before and the paperwork when you come back with the COVID tests, the passenger locator forms, which is it's just adds extra stress. If you don't pass your COVID test before you leave, you can't go. So you can only do that 24 hours, 48 hours before you're planning on leave. So all that planning you've done with hotels and travel and flights, it goes out the window because you've tested positive 24 hours before you're leaving.
Well, you're doing all that planning with your fingers crossed, aren't you?
You are, and it's quite stressful, because for work, I suppose it's not so much. If it's a holiday, family holiday, and one of you gets COVID, I can imagine it is going to be stressful. Let's hope that does change sooner rather than later. But no, the actual airports are busy. The flight was packed, and you wouldn't, apart from the masks, actually on the flight, you wouldn't know any different.
So I'm going to ask you what's next in a minute. Quick question before we do that. How do you now feel? You've been promoted since taking on the job. You're now sort of director rather than manager. So you must have done something really, really right during the pandemic. Congratulations on that, James, as well. How do you now feel about the role, certainly being different from the one that you were presumably attracted to in 2019?
Yeah, the role. Well, my role now is obviously as director. I'm more involved with the business side of things, if you like. I'll still be responsible for the overseas part of the business from a sales and marketing perspective. We're just about to appoint a UK-based business development manager, so that will free up me a lot on the UK side, and that's a new role for us as well. We never had one before, so that'll be great. Adds to our sales capability, certainly. So yeah, my role has changed personally, probably a lot. If you'd asked me when I started, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. Without that, I'd still be just traveling around trying to, get new work overseas, and that was the role. And very quickly, it wasn't what I was doing, or was doing very differently. So what's going to happen in 2 years? I've got no idea what's going to happen in 2 years, because after the last 2 years, good luck to anybody to work that one out. But I'm glad it's changed, it's changed for the better, for my opinion, and for us as a business. We were acquired by Indutrade in the middle of the pandemic. So we were doing lots of things right at the time, must have been, and we've learned a hell of a lot. And we've been successful, and we're looking to be even more successful, and we continue to grow.
I suspect your hamster wheel is less spinny. I suspect it's a bit more manageable. I suspect you've got some opportunities to stop and smell the flowers, as it was a little bit, in terms of, rather than rushing around from, location to location, which in itself is quite stressful. You don't often get time to think and plan. You've had a lot of thinking and planning time. You've taken advantage of that as Puretech and as James Steptoe, haven't you?
We have, actually, yeah. And it's worked to our benefit from word go, because we've got the medical gas side of the business, which obviously when we started the pandemic, building all these Nightingale hospitals and extending ICUs in all the big hospitals in London, we were very much heavily involved with that. So that got the pandemic, if you like, kept our revenue going, and then we've built from there.
Yeah.
So we have been lucky. As I know there's lots of businesses out there that have not been so lucky, just because nothing to do with their own fault. The sectors they're working in, whether it be hospitality, airlines, travel, there's so many people that have been affected. We just happen to be lucky that we work in the sector that has not only not been affected, but has effectively grown.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's been great exploring the changing landscape. It's great to talk to a global sales director who hasn't been on a plane very often for 2 years, which is an interesting concept because it's very alien to what the role was originally intended to do. I know Puretech, being part of Indutrade, are going to continue to go from strength to strength, and adaptation seems to be the key. I'm sure you're going to go and meet some of your agents and distributors over the next few months when those countries open up, and hopefully you don't get any shocks when you do meet them and you find that they are the right people that you've appointed virtually, because that's always good for the morale, I guess, isn't it? So all that remains for me to do really is to remind people of the podcast, the fact that it's available on all your popular podcast platforms: iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Podbean, Castbox, you name it, it's on there. All available through the IMPACTUS-group.com website as well. My contact details for those who are watching this on YouTube are on the last screen, as indeed are James's. All of our contact details and some other information will be in the show notes for the episode. But all that remains for me to say is, James, thank you for being our first guest back after our winter break. And thanks for sharing your experiences of global pandemic management in a global sales role. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Great to speak to you.
And you. Take care.